WYTLabs, an e-commerce marketing agency. Today's guest is Allison. Allison, feel free to introduce yourself and let our viewers know about yourself and your background.
Hi, yeah, Allison. Allison Turnley, founder of Converte, an upcycle clothing brand that we manufacture at the moment from Nairobi using consumer waste. And that's my passion and my driving focus and love.
Awesome. What inspired you to create the brand?
What inspired me to create the brand was actually jet travel, which doesn't really talk much about sustainability. But actually, early in 2017, I was a personal stylist working with the UN Patron of the Oceans, Lewis Pugh. And in that capacity, I'd been in Oxford Street and beyond looking for sort of clothing. But what really struck me at that time, so I'd come from South Africa and flown into London to shop. And it wasn't just me shopping on Oxford Street on that Saturday morning. You could barely move on the sidewalks. It was crowded with Gen Zers, all of them shopping. I'd been there on the Friday, all of them were shopping then. And what it appeared to me is that they were shopping for wherever they were going that night, which was very different growing up me having grown up in the 80s to how we went out. And then I got on a plane that evening. Kenya Airlines flew into Nairobi, and on Sunday, I was in Toy Market in Nairobi. So basically what happened was in less than 24 hours, I went to heaving sidewalks on Oxford Street in London, to heaving tables of consumer waste, discarded clothing, often hardly worn, in Toy Market in Nairobi, which is one of the biggest open air markets where a lot of our discarded clothing end up. And for me, that was it was so impactful. And at that time, also having been a costume designer in the film industry for 30 years, and knowing how I had used wardrobe, for adverts, it was just like, this cannot continue. This cannot continue. It cannot actually continue. We cannot manage it. And that, as I say, was back in 2017. And then there was a whole lot of thinking and processing and R&D that went in, because I thought, well, first I figured, how are we going to change this? It seems almost unstoppable. The mammoth that is fast fashion, the consumerism that was going on, particularly pre-COVID. You can't really take on such huge organizations, especially not as an individual. So then I thought, well, what was the appeal? What was the original appeal? I guess that was also the second really pivotal moment for me, is when I thought, okay, there must have been something really appealing in this process. And of course, if you look back at the history of fast fashion that was developed by Zara in the 80s, it was about democratizing fashion. Prior to fast fashion, you had this, it was elite. It was inaffordable. Most of us would be looking at what would be in Vogue or in our glossy magazines, and we'd be lucky 2-3 years down the line for it to filter through into the high street stores or wherever, into patterns that we'd buy from Buttrick and materials. But that was changed by the advent of the fast fashion model, which meant that everybody could afford it, everybody could have it. So I thought, well, therein lies the clue. When I looked at sustainability as well, and at sustainable fashion at that time, and going up towards 2019, I felt it had almost gone to where fashion was prior to fast fashion. It's fantastic, it's beautiful, it's exciting, it's elite. But like organic vegetables, if you can afford it, great, but most of us can't. So that then became my driving force, is to kind of challenge it, change it, make it desirable, but do it at scale, affordable and accessible. I democratize sustainability as well. And therein Convert was born.
Awesome. Amazing story. Who's your target audience?
Well, this is an interesting question, because everyone says you have to have a target audience. I think
you don't have to always have a target audience.
Exactly,
yeah.
right? Exactly. But whenever I went to investors, whenever I spoke to, when we were doing pitch decks, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that this is something that has to change fundamentally in marketing and in investors and in pitch decks, is that the ideas of a very specific focused target audience, I think, are sort of moving. They're shifting. All of that is shifting. When I was told I had to find a target audience, I went for Gen Z. Probably because I had my own children that fell within that range, and they were my research project of 3. but I found them fascinating. I find that generation, and obviously Gen Alpha and everyone else, but particularly Gen Z, I just found them so inspiring. Whether it's our reptilian brain screaming, you need to stop, but whatever it is, they've really challenged and continue to challenge the status quo in ways that I find very inspiring. So I went initially as a target audience of Gen Z. But when I got to the MVP stage, what I found is that I wanted to go back to my roots, which is that Convert needs to be gender neutral, age neutral, everything neutral. It needs to be rather about what fashion really is, which is you're flying your colors. You are flying who and what you believe in. And for me, anybody that believed that we can express our individuality without destroying the world's resources, we could look cool, we could be individual, we could talk to who we were and what we were, and by doing that, do that also by using consumer and then moving forward industrial apparel waste in new and inspiring ways through upcycling.
Awesome. Amazing.
And MVP, my youngest on our trials she was 12. She loved it. And my oldest repeat client, 79.
Wow.
And everyone in between.
Amazing.
I think it is about talking to who and what you want to be rather than a brief flash in the pan fashion.
It's fair. What makes you better than your competitors?
Well, interesting question. What makes me better than my competitors? The question is, somebody said, how will you know when Convert is really successful? I was asked that question for a piece done for the FT Audio. And I said, it's when there is no more need for Convert. Then I know it's successful. Once we've actually dealt with the issue, once we don't have when fashion doesn't cost the earth, quite literally, not just figuratively anymore, as we know. When I started in 2019, as I say, I really battled when I was having conversations with investors or with venture capital firms who wanted to assist me and help me with mentors. Just the terminology, just the thinking that I was trying to get across seemed very foreign. And then, amongst the many ills it brought, COVID arrived. And again, I always see that, within everything, there's potentially the germ of a new beginning. And what happened certainly with my children is they went from being free to move around, to do the shopping, to being stuck at home.
Mm.
And suddenly the aggregation platforms that I'd been speaking of and said and predicting prior to COVID that peer-to-peer selling would become a reality. I was thinking the research was showing sort of end of 2020 going into 2030s, that the next decade. Of course, that all fast forwarded when suddenly you had generations that were stuck at home, that couldn't get out to the shops, that couldn't do that Oxford Street shopping I had witnessed. And obviously with the advent of Depop, Vinted, the world became a huge dressing up basket for them. What else were they going to do but swap clothes? And the story was the traveling pants. Is there a film or something or a book? Do you know do you know the one I mean?
I do, yeah.
So it kind of began to remind me of that. I just thought, gosh, imagine if you get the story of some of these clothes whose lives are now being extended, that rather than being donated or discarded or actually being moved around. It's absolutely fascinating. So if you were to ask me who my competition is, I think it's that. I think it's the fact that we are beginning to fundamentally change how we shop, and I believe that's a good thing. So it's not necessarily another brand per se. I would say it's a change of mindset, where increasingly, certainly on this side in the UK, you're getting, and I've been doing workshops at Durham University. I've been working with Gen Zers. I'm going to be running further workshops with A-levels students, and what they're doing is they're using those aggregation platforms more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, 100%.
I think that's a challenge for everybody who's producing, however they're producing, and it's a good challenge. It's a positive challenge.
Definitely. What are your best-selling products?
Bando. Still the Bando. When I launched this and I had all these grand ideas, my brother said, stick to one product. I should have listened to him. You should always listen to your big brother. The bandeau, that was what was one of the first breakthrough moments for me around Convert, and what we were talking about around upcycling and discarded consumer waste, which is a little bit more complicated, obviously, than industrial waste, because you're opening 50-kilogram bales and you don't know what you're going to find. There's I have real images of me sitting in mountains of discarded clothing, looking at everything and trying to understand how we can turn this into something else. And the breakthrough moment, again, the third big breakthrough moment, again, for me, was I was sitting in Cape Town working on a shoot as a costume designer, thinking of my experience at Toy Market and all these clothing I'd seen. And I was holding up a man's shirt, and I happened to look up to the rail I was preparing for the fitting for later on that day with the director, and I saw a bandeau, and I looked back at the man's shirt and I looked back at the bandeau, and I thought, it's the same thing. I can take the back of this man's shirt, cut out the panel, slice it in half, sew it together, create a tube, share it, you have a bandeau.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when discarded clothing stopped keeping their style and became a raw material for me. They kind of disintegrated out and reformed in my mind in a million different ways, like a jigsaw puzzle. It was amazing, actually. I've never taken drugs, but I've often thought that was the trip I had, surely from that just idea. So our biggest selling and our most successful product has been the bandeau, and it remains so. And it's interesting because that was the first product I saw when I thought, yeah, we don't just have to change a shirt into a different shirt. We can change a shirt into an entirely different product and into something that's desirable. It's creative. The artisans that are creating it get to bring up their own creativity to the project, and the person buying it, when they put on that bandeau, we started them at £8.50. They now retail for £12. But what I've always heard is, when apart from being great bandeaus and all individual, is when they put them on, you're shifting something inside the consumer as well. You're telling them that they have the power to change this world that is facing so many problems. And by the simple choice of taking a bandeau that's upcycled, they are part of that change. And I find that as exciting as working with my teams in Kenya is feeling the results with my consumers and sensing that sense of empowerment, particularly amongst Gen Zs, who really are facing incredible challenges, in the world. So just to let them remember that, to put them back in touch with their own power in this story.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds maybe a bit out there, but it's very much a part of my belief system of why I do Convert.
Awesome. Where can we buy Convert?
Where can we buy Convert? I knew you were going to ask this difficult question. At the moment, Convert is looking to relocate, but it will be back online, we're hoping, by the end of the year.
Okay.
Prior to that, we were selling in bricks and mortars. We did an MVP, which I delayed for far too long. That's my message to new people with startups, and particularly when they concept ideas. You're almost scared to get it out there in case somebody might sort of steal your idea. Don't be. Ideas are universal. Just get in there, and if I could change anything in my journey, I would say get in with getting in front of your audience as quickly as possible.
Awesome.
Don't fear the process.
Great advice.
And yeah, so we'll be selling hopefully soon at Zero again in Guildford.
Okay.
And then we do have a website presence at the moment, but we're hoping to relaunch to retail via that and our app within the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay. What's your future plan for yourself and the brand? You kind of just said that, but I mean,
my future plan is never small. I've actually been talking to some amazing women that I've met at a group that I'm a part of called Savitas. They're women interpret. They're just the most incredible. Another thing for people that create and founders, they tend to kind of become so singly focused on your project and your passion, you lose the networking. It almost feels like I've come up for air and I've met this amazing support group of women. And so the next project is to try and create, to work with possibly with organizations, circularity organizations within the EU, and to tie up circular economy through the UK, who has a huge skills base in the Midlands that is kind of pretty depressed at the moment, the economy, together with the skills base and the artisanal and the natural understanding of upcycling and recycling that is part of Africa's heritage, and to launch a sort of cooperative through that where you can actually exchange ideas and exchange the product and build up a truly circular economy around fashion, and potentially bringing in machine learning as well to begin to deal with the categorization of that apparel and textile waste, which is what I'm also working with at the moment.
Great. Amazing. Alison, what advice can you give an entrepreneur that's looking to start a brand in 2024?
Yeah. I'm going to go with some of the advice of the mistakes I think I've made. 2024. Don't get caught. Well, first of all, this might sound a bit gender-based. If you're a female founder, know that you're going to deal with more. I'm talking about female because that's my experience, but obviously there are other groups that fall into the same kind of category. You know, the research has just come out that male-run founded companies will be given investment, female will be given mentorship. You know, they'll give the men the money and they'll give us tell us what to do. And I know that that's not, you know, that's not only for females. There are other disadvantaged groups that have the same experience. So my advice, be wary of what I call the pitch deck merry-go-round. I have on my OneDrive close to 30 different pitch decks. It's an important document. It's important that you have that. But one can get so bogged down in making each one the granular of that you lose sight. Get onto your product as quickly as possible. Don't be scared that even no matter how unique the idea is, don't be scared to get it out there and in front of people because you fear it might be copied before you can become successful. If it's going to be copied before you become successful, it'll happen at any stage. So the advice I would give is be wary of trying to perfect as I did and get bogged down in the perfection before the launch. Just get into the launch. Get your hands dirty. Get making the product. Get it in front of your consumers. Start doing MVP as soon as possible. Grow from it. Learn from it. Understand what issues you're going to be facing and let it grow. The quicker you can do that, the quicker you can begin to grow organically.
Amazing advice.
And that will then dictate your pitch decks, etc., etc.
Awesome, Allison. That's great advice. I really appreciate I appreciate you coming on today and telling your story and how about your brand. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really feel honored. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.